Joining me now is Credlin Viewer favourite and columnist at the Australian newspaper, Dr. Jennifer Oriel, broadcaster and author Kel Richards, and freelance journalist and columnist Corinne Barraclough. Thank you all for your time tonight. Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. I just had a conversation then with Craig Kelly about Victoria's badness on energy targets. In fact, what they're planning to do with these interim targets is well and beyond anything that Australia's signed up at the Paris Agreement. Now, you're a lawyer. I can't understand how a state can exceed national targets when we all know emissions are global. Emissions don't sort of stop at the Victorian border, and none of this has been taken to an election by the Premier in Victoria.
Well, the difficulty we have is that Daniel Andrews is operating we're operating in the dark with Daniel Andrews. We don't quite know what's motivating him to do this. I think, though, that there's a connection that isn't often explored and that should be, namely that Daniel Andrews, the Socialist Labor Premier of Victoria, has signed up to the China's Belt and Road Initiative. We know that China is pushing renewable energy and pushing really the deindustrialisation of Western states because it works to China's advantage. And we know that part of the Belt and Road Initiative is China making inroads into various nations in the Southern Hemisphere, including Australia's Pacific neighbours, for the purpose of establishing infrastructure to increase its presence and access to Australia. But this is a real problem, I think, in terms of Daniel Andrews, because he's going well beyond, as you say, the Paris target, and he's endangering Victoria's economy. He's endangering Victoria's energy supply, and no one seems able to stop him. And there's a real question here of whether Victorians have the will to stop him. I suspect it will take a disaster in Victoria before people respond logically to what he's doing, and that's a real shame that they won't act in defence of their own interests against a government that clearly doesn't uphold it.
Corinne, I want to move to the issue of ICAC in New South Wales and these trad revelations today. Yes, she's breached the ministerial code and the cabinet handbook. The CCC says she hasn't breached or met the criminal law sort of threshold, so they won't be pursuing her further. She's been given a Clayton's demotion by Anastasia Palaszczuk, and obviously all the things that have happened in the last few weeks in New South Wales. Have we got a crisis in our political integrity in this country at this time?
Well, it's just one thing after another, isn't it? And I think, you know, if she thinks that because she's going to not be investigated that people are going to suddenly have their faith restored in her, she's absolutely kidding herself. You know, it's gone, it's torched. But the Palaszczuk government is in real trouble. And as you say, it kind of spirals from there. There is a problem with the general public trusting politicians, and this is another example of why.
Kel Richards, you know, I do laugh when people say that this now is the excuse or the rationale to bring in more public funding and 100% public funding. Some are arguing for political parties. But if they can't manage the donations they're getting now inside the law, why on earth should we give them taxpayers' money to do the wrong thing with?
Exactly. And it would disturb me to think that parties that I don't vote for and don't particularly like are getting some of my money. As a taxpayer, if I want to give money to a political party, I'll make that decision, I'll make that donation. I don't want someone else to decide that for me. What keeps crossing my mind is why won't complete transparency work? If there was a system whereby every dollar that's donated to a political party had to be listed on their website, had to be declared, had to be in the open, so that journalists, and the members of the public for that matter, can go to the website and say, right, that's where the money's coming from. We can see how much the unions are giving to the Labor Party. We can see how much, you know, is coming from whoever for every political party. If we had complete transparency, I mean, you've worked in politics, Peter, you can tell me, would complete transparency solve this?
I think real-time disclosures, Kel, would go a long way. Now, you know, you can all get online and look at your own bank account and see within a matter of hours where there's been a transaction made. Political parties have always said real-time disclosures are too hard, and I think perhaps a few years ago they were. But now that everything is as it is electronically, I think it's a no-brainer. Even if it happened within a fortnight of the donation being made, I think it's the threshold we need to get to. But, Jennifer, you know, this idea that because the politicians can't abide by the rules that they themselves legislated, we now have to change the rules. If anyone else breaks the rules, they get the book thrown at them. But now there's arguments that, well, they can't meet these rules or the rules are too tough. I mean, look at Anastasia Palaszczuk and Jackie Trad. Look at Jackie Trad. Not so long ago, a premier in New South Wales lost his job over a bottle of wine. We're talking about a $700,000 home purchase related to a decision that only she was going to make sitting on her desk.
Yeah, Australia's meant to be an advanced liberal democracy. We're not meant to be a corrupt regime. And Labor is facing, in a number of states, is facing a real challenge, a real test of its integrity. And so far it's falling well short of the mark. You're seeing in Queensland excuses being made for what clearly, I think, to the general public looks like a severe conflict of interest, a pecuniary interest here. And if there's no way to hold politicians accountable, then the democratic deficit will continue to grow. We're already at a stage where people don't trust the political establishment. People are wanting not to play a part in democracy as much as they used to. They no longer think the young people in Australia have been polled, and they no longer think democracy is the best form of government. And this is why. So we have to be able to hold them accountable. And who's watching the politicians? Who's guarding their behaviour? Who's ensuring that they're accountable to the public? Real-time donation declarations are a good idea. Some politicians in Israel have adopted that approach, and it's working pretty well. So I agree with you. I think that they need to be held accountable, and we should ensure that that kind of legislation is passed to hold them accountable, because they're unable to govern themselves, it would seem.